And we have decisions at the government level being based on mythology. No, we don't have to study how to prepare for the next pandemic, which may be around the corner. We have Robert Kennedy as a source of authority saying, take ivermectin or take cod liver oil. So we're going back to a purely mythological basis and destroying by totally defunding medical science, which was sort of the last science to start to be separated from technology.
There's like a weird set of incentive structures that are at the heart of science, whether it's medicine or Big Bang cosmology or particle physics, where there's a lot of people that are making money hand over fist for a given paradigm. Like the pandemic was the biggest bottom line for every single pharmaceutical company that was involved in, I think, the history of pharmaceutical companies. I think that CERN is maybe one of the biggest scientific undertakings. The Big Bang projects of these massive telescope arrays are just guzzling funds. And so I feel like there's this weird interplay where, we talk a little bit about the way that science was working at the end of the 19th century. And as I read it, I'm like, yeah, there's characters that are at universities and they're professors, but we're still at this point where there's a lot of hobbyists, a lot of people that are working on things that are outside of this massive industrial funding regime. And so it seems like there's progress that's happening in part because the systems have not yet been captured by a single significant economic interest. And so something that I kind of wanted to come back to, which is tangential to this, is why the Big Bang prevents plasma from being such an important part of the cosmos. Because as you said, you look out into the cosmos, everything is plasma. How does that get sidelined to be something that's incidental, like accidental? Like we're obsessed with dark matter and dark energy, which is supposed to be, 99% of the universe.
96.
96? Oh, I'm sorry. But that seems weird to me because, okay, so there's this thing that's undetectable, invisible. We've constructed entire research programs around it and insisting that it's very, very important. And yet plasma, which is obvious and ever present, seems to be kind of this, it's like the butt of the joke almost. It's very weird.
All right, but you're raising two distinct questions.
Yeah.
One is the sociological, and the other is the scientific/ideological. I mean, obviously, during the course of the 20th century, the structure of scientific research changed radically. But you can't exaggerate science was very much institutionalized at the end of the 19th century. First of all, you did have the development of companies that were entirely science-based. The big example would be Edison. So Edison pretty much invented the notion of a industrial research lab, which he headed and was the chief scientist in the Edison lab here in New Jersey. So that became one model of industrial enterprise, actually in-housing, as we would say, scientific applied research. And the universities had developed, at that time, self-funded research. And obviously, the amounts of money that were needed were far less than today. I'll get into how far less, but you really didn't have to spend a lot of money to build a Crookes tube. And all these, huge revolution in science that occurred starting in 1895 were based on this simple piece of technology. But already, some experiments needed more funding. Sort of the founder of, or the precursor of plasma physics, Christian Birkeland, he was studying the aurora, and he was, of course, aware of the simultaneous research with the Crookes tube. So his theory was, just like the Crookes tube showed that these particles, they didn't know that they were electrons, were causing this glow. He thought the aurora was caused by a glow in the space with charged particles coming from the sun. So to demonstrate that in the lab, he built a Torella. And a Torella is basically sort of a primitive electrical model of the Earth surrounded by plasma. So it was in an enclosed vacuum chamber. Those experiments started to exceed what the university wanted to spend. And then he said, to test some of his predictions observationally, he had to go to the north of Norway into the Arctic region to actually measure electrical currents coming from the aurora. And those expeditions cost a lot of money. So even then, he decided that he needed to raise the money himself. And he actually became a businessman, an entrepreneur, to finance these experiments. So you were having the transition where experiments were getting too expensive to just finance out of your own pocket for very limited university funds.
Our videos come out of LPP Fusion's research in fusion energy, the energy which will power a future of abundance for all, with a sustainable economy and a clean environment. Goods, housing, and transportation will be affordable to all once fusion kicks in. Fusion energy is the key to building a better world now. Support fusion research, $10 a month at lppfusion.com/support. The link is in the description. Thanks.
I know that this is a detour, but can you tell about the experiments that he was doing there? Like, what was he like flying airplanes to measure things? Was he like building antennas or just measuring
No.
conductivity?
What he was doing was he made the hypothesis that was very important to all subsequent work, that based on Maxwell's laws, that sufficiently strong electric currents had to be traveling along magnetic field lines. So a magnetic field line is an imaginary concept, but it traces something real, which is it connects the direction of the magnetic field at each point. So if the direction of the magnetic field is similar as you move in space, you get that's the direction of the magnetic field line. So it's a mapping of something very real, magnetic field. And the magnetic field, as I'm fond of saying, is the real force that pervades the universe, not the Star Wars one. But there is a single magnetic field pervading everywhere in the universe, stronger or weaker. So if you have a electric current that is not aligned with the magnetic field, then the electrons, what we know to carry the current, orbit around this magnetic field line. This just comes from Maxwell's laws. Two things happen. One is the orbiting electron radiates energy, so it slows down, and it can't travel in one direction. It has to travel in a helix. If it travels, and if there's any resistance, over great distances, it loses energy to collisions. If it travels along the magnetic field line, it can move straight in that direction, and the energy loss is minimized and the current is maximized. So, knowing this, Birkeland hypothesized that there should be field-aligned currents that go straight down to the Earth from the aurora. So they would only reach the Earth in the Arctic areas. So he went there with magnetometers, which measure the magnetic field. And to make somewhat long story, somewhat shorter, what he found was that the pattern of magnetic fields went in circles. So these were placed in mountains during winter storms at great risk to their lives. It's amazing they all survived. But what they showed was that the field was in a circle. And again, from Maxwell's laws, if there's a circular field, there has to be a current moving through it. So basically, he showed that there were these vertical currents that had to be aligned with the center of these magnetic field arrays.
And
So
are
all of this
these
costs
Birkeland currents?
these are the Birkeland, what are now called the Birkeland currents, because he discovered them.
And Birkeland currents are helical or they're just circular?
We get into something where you really should show an image of this because my hands aren't going to work.
I can write it
But-
down, yeah.
We
Yeah,
can edit that in later. No problem.
right. But basically, Birkeland and subsequent researchers, including Alfvén, showed that there's such a thing as a force-free filament. That's a basic structure that nature forms at all scales. And a force-free filament is that at the outside of this filament, the currents are moving helically, and the magnetic field is exactly the same, helical, like a tight screw. At the center, if you have a helical current, at the center of that current, called a solenoid, you have a magnetic field that runs straight along the axis. The current and the field at the center runs straight along the axis. In between, it's intermediate. You get a tighter and tighter helix as you go from the center of this filament to the outside. So all of these things, the currents combine so as to produce the magnetic fields, and the magnetic fields guide the currents. So we've explained this in one of our videos. We can post the link. So that's the easiest, the minimum energy loss way of getting current from one place to the other. So that's because Mother Nature is not lazy, but she doesn't want to work hard. That's the way that currents move in the universe and here on Earth.